All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight is the last webinar about market structures. We've organized a series of webinars on perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, and the last one is about monopolistic competition. So this should not be too long. There is not too much to say about this last market structure. And after we are done with this, I will continue organizing webinars, but we will probably go a little bit back in the A2 syllabus, and I will start talking about consumer equilibrium and cost function, product functions in the short run and long run as well. Okay, but today let's have a quick look at monopolistic competition, our last market structure. So the first thing that you and your students need to be able to do is to define this market structure in terms of its characteristics. So what you can say is that monopolistic competition is essentially the same as perfect competition. The only thing that is different is that now firms sell slightly differentiated products. Remember that in perfect competition, all businesses sell exactly the same product. Here in monopolistic competition, each of them will sell a similar product. If they are not similar, they would not be in the same market. So a similar product, but that has some different characteristics. Sorry, just plugging my computer. I'm running out of battery. All right. So what are the characteristics? First, monopolistic is a market structure in which there are many buyers and sellers. Do not forget to mention that there are many buyers. Sometimes students, they only say there are many sellers. It's also important to explain what happens on the demand side. Many sellers as well, none of whom have a large market share. Because if you had like many sellers, but let's say two of them are really big, we would actually call that a duopoly. Okay, so many small firms and consumers as well. Second characteristic, there are no barriers to entry or exit. Same as perfect competition, free entry and exit. Third characteristic, which is the only thing that is different from perfect competition, the goods or services are differentiated. So remember, again, let me emphasize that differentiated does not mean completely different. You cannot say that a bottle of Coca-Cola and a car are differentiated products because they have to be exactly the same. So a typical example of two goods that can be differentiated would be two different brands of cars. If you have like a BMW and a Mercedes-Benz, it would be two slightly differentiated products. You can take two different drinks, be Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. They are similar, but they are not exactly the same. This is what we mean by product differentiation. And unlike monopoly and perfect competition, for which there are very few real-life examples, it is actually very easy to find examples of markets that are monopolistically competitive. Typical example is restaurants. There are some streets where you have many restaurants, many sellers, and also many potential customers. There are no barriers to entry, or at least the barriers to entry are relatively low in that industry. And each restaurant, they sell a similar product, which is meals, but they don't use the same recipes. They do not provide the same service. They do not produce the same type of food. So of course, the products provided by these restaurants are differentiated. Hairdressers as well, garages, market stores, driving school, travel agents. There are many examples of markets that would match the definition of monopolistic competition pretty well. It doesn't have to be exactly what we have. For example, there is always at least some barriers to entry, but if they are sufficiently low, you can consider that to be a good match with a monopolistic competitive market. What else? Yeah, it's often considered to be more realistic than perfect competition or monopoly. Remember that perfect competition or monopoly, they mainly serve as benchmarks. They are theoretical benchmarks, and it's very complicated to find real-life examples of markets that are purely perfectly competitive or purely monopolistic, unless if this is the case of a legal monopoly, if you have a patent or something like that. Okay, so what is very important is that since each firm sells a product that is different from its competitors, price is not the only selection criterion for consumers. Remember, when we described perfect competition, we explained that each firm was facing a demand or an individual demand that was horizontal, that was perfectly elastic at the equilibrium price, simply because if this firm tried to charge a price that was slightly above the equilibrium price, no one would be willing to buy from this particular company. And if this perfectly competitive business charged the price slightly below the market price, the entire market demand would, all the consumers in the market would be willing to purchase from that particular company. But here, there are different varieties of the product. You can, different brands of cars, different tastes, different services. So even if you have one business that charges a higher price than its competitors, it will still face a strictly positive demand, which means that even though its price is greater than its competitors, there will still be consumers willing to purchase from this particular business simply because the consumers, they like this product better. Okay, so for example, even though let's take the case of watches. Even though the watch, there are two types of watch A and watch B. Even though watch A is more expensive than watch B, if I like it better, if I like the design better, for example, I will be willing to pay a higher price and get watch A rather than watch B. And of course, even if watch B is cheaper, it will not get all the buyers because, as I said, some buyers will prefer to pay a higher price to get to watch A rather than watch B. So this is a very significant difference between monopolistic competition and perfect competition. And the consequence is that the demand is actually downward sloping. The individual demand facing each monopolistically competitive firm is going to be downward sloping, which means that if I raise the price, this is what I explained here, if you have one individual firm that raises the price, it will lose some customers, but not all customers, okay? Perhaps it will lose the customers that do not have a strong preference for or in favor of the good or service that this business produces, the less loyal consumers, okay, that can just say instead, oh, this becomes too expensive, I will just buy a cheaper product. So the quantity demanded will decrease, but it will not fall to zero. And if I cut the price of my product, I will gain some consumers, I will gain some market share, but I will not have a 100% market share, even if my product is sold at a lower price than my competitors. Again, I might gain consumers who don't have a strong preference between one brand or the other, one product or the other, for which price remains the most important criterion. But for those consumers that are very loyal to the other brand, or loyal simply means here that they really enjoy the product better, even though my product is indeed cheaper, they will keep buying the most expensive product. Okay, so there are some consumers that are very fond of Apple phones, of iPhones, and even if it's more expensive than most of the other smartphones, they will keep purchasing that simply because they like the product better. Okay. So the consequence, and this is really the first thing that we need to emphasize, and you can compare what happens in perfect competition with what happens in a monopolistically competitive industry, is that the demand facing each monopolistically competitive individual firm is downward sloping. It's not horizontal, as was the case in perfect competition. Good. Basically, in perfect competition, we said that all firms are price takers. Price takers meant that they had no influence on the price whatsoever. Another way to put it is to say that they had no market power. They had no way to have any influence on the market equilibrium. In monopolistic competition, things are different because products are differentiated, and product differentiation will give some market power. Why? Simply because if I raise the price, I will still keep some consumers that are relatively captive. Captive, which means that even if I raise the price, they keep purchasing from me because they like my product better. If you take the example of fast food chains, even if McDonald's raises the price of its Big Mac, there would still be people who keep buying Big Macs simply because they really like the taste better than the sandwiches or the burgers in a KFC, Burger King, or other fast food restaurants like that. So it is through product differentiation that firms have some market power, in the sense that they can raise the price and there will still be consumers that will purchase for them. Okay, good. Yeah, so they are price maker, of course. As soon as a business has some market power and has some ability to raise the price, we say that it is price maker. And here, let me emphasize it again. It is the existence of product differentiation that creates this market power. Again, that's the only difference between monopolistic competition and perfect competition. And remember that in perfect competition, all firms are price takers. Remember that in AS, when we studied demand, and in particular when we studied the price elasticity of demand, we studied the factors that make the demand more or less price elastic. And one factor that we teach to our students is the number of substitutes in consumption. The idea is that the demand is likely to be relatively price inelastic if the product doesn't have many substitutes. Basically, you don't have the choice. So if the price rises, you have to buy from the same supplier, even if it's more expensive, simply because you cannot replace this good by another. Here in monopolistic competition, because there are many other businesses producing similar products, it means that there are many substitutes in consumption for the product that the individual firm produces. And for that reason, we can expect that demand is going to be relatively price elastic due to the existence of many substitutes in consumption. So one advice is, if you draw a monopolistically competitive market, make sure that the demand curve is relatively flat to recognize the fact that the product sold by one individual firm has many substitutes in consumption. And for that reason, the market power is relatively weak. Yeah, each firm has the ability to raise the price because some customers prefer their products, but this market power remains weak simply because if I raise the price too much, well, even if consumers, they like my product better, there will be a point, there will be a maximum price above which they will just stop purchasing my product and buy the product of a competitor that is going to be cheaper. So especially if we compare the market power of a monopolistically competitive firm with the market power of a monopolist, of course, a monopolist has a much stronger market power than a monopolistically competitive firm, simply because it is the only seller, because there are very high barriers to entry, and because there are no close substitutes in consumption. So in this case, one way to reduce competition for a monopolistically competitive firm and to increase its market power is to increase differentiation. Basically, what you should keep in mind is that the more differentiated the product, the less intense competition. Because if you really manage to differentiate your product from your competitors, it means that the products of your competitors are no longer close substitutes. They are remote substitutes, which means that your consumers, if they choose to stop buying your product, they will have to buy a product that is going to be very different from the preferred variety, and that we might not be able to meet their expectations or to provide as much satisfaction as your product. So that's what I explained here. In order to increase its market power, a monopolistically competitive firm can use non-price competition strategies. We talked about that in the webinar on oligopoly, such as investment in advertising, develop a strong brand image, and make the individual demand curve less price elastic. Why does it make it less price elastic? Because again, when you create differentiation, you increase brand loyalty. So consumers will become more captive. Even if you raise the price, fewer of them will switch from your product to another. And again, you decrease the ease with which consumers can substitute one product for the other if you increase the intensity of product differentiation. Okay, so that's basically what we've done so far, is basically the characteristics of monopolistic competition. So that's what you have to do first. We need to define the characteristic. Now, how does it work? How do we find the equilibrium in monopolistic competition? Well, as was the case in perfect competition, we have to distinguish between the short-run equilibrium and the long-run equilibrium. And the difference between the short-run and the long-run is exactly the same as what we had in perfect competition. In the short-run, there is a fixed number of businesses that compete with each other. And in the long run, firms can enter the market. If the existing firms make profit, make abnormal profit in the short run, then this will attract new firms who will enter in the long run. So you'll have more competitors. And on the other hand, if businesses make a loss, a negative economic profit in the short run, then some firms will exit the market in the long run. Therefore, there will be fewer competitors. Okay, so let's see what happens. To simplify, let's assume that all firms are identical, okay? So we'll just look at one typical firm, one representative firm. What's gonna happen? Each firm wants to maximize profit, okay? So what is the rule to maximize profit? We know that MC is equal to MR. So each firm is producing its own variety of product. It will face its own individual demand curve for its particular product. So basically what happens is that each individual firm is going to behave like a monopolist on this individual demand curve. So this is not the market demand curve. There is one demand only for the variety of product that this firm produces, and it behaves as a monopolist on that particular market segment. You can call it the market segment. If you have the total market demand, you can divide it into many small market segments, each for one type of product, and well, one firm for each type of product. And that's actually why we call that monopolistic competition, because firms are competing within the same market. You have many different firms, but each of them behaves like a monopolist on its particular market segment. So how does it work? So each firm operates where MC is equal to MR to maximize its profit. And then there are two cases. In the short run, they can either make a positive profit or a negative profit. So first, let's consider the case where firms make positive economic profit. So let's assume each monopolistically competitive firm makes abnormal profit in the short run. And I just recall what the definition of the short run is: a period of time where the number of firms is fixed. Nobody enters, nobody exits. What happens then? In the long run, again, I give the definition: a period of time where enough time has elapsed for firms to enter or exit the industry. So the number of firms is variable in the long run. The existence of abnormal profit combined with the free entry assumption, implies that new firms will enter the industry. So firms outside the market, they see that this market is profitable. Firms make an abnormal profit, so they want to enter. Can they do that? Yes, because there are no barriers to entry. So we will have more firms who enter in this industry. So here we have to be very careful. When we looked at perfect competition, we said that when more firms enter, supply increases. This is when we use the side-by-side diagram of perfect competition. And when we represented the long-run equilibrium, we simply said that, if more firms enter, supply shifts to the right, and therefore we're going to have a decrease in the equilibrium price. Okay, it doesn't work like this here. Why? Simply because there is no supply curve in monopolistic competition. It's often a mistake that many people make, but there is no supply curve in monopolistic competition. Why? Simply because the concept of supply curve needs firms to be price takers. If firms are price makers, then there is no supply curve. Just like in an oligopoly, just like in a monopoly, there is no supply curve. Remember, what is the definition of supply? It's a relationship between a given market price and the quantity that firms are willing and able to sell. Okay, so the key word here is a given market price. There is no given market price in monopolistic competition because firms are price makers. Okay, so how do we represent it in monopolistic competition? The idea here is that because there are more firms in the market, and assuming that the market demand remains the same, you can say the number of consumers remain the same, then if there are more firms, consumers are going to be divided into smaller groups, smaller market segments. Okay, a simple example, let's say that you have 1,000 consumers and only 2 firms, okay, that sell 2 different products. Well, let's just assume that they will 500 of them will choose product A and 500 of them will choose product B. Okay, so the individual demand of each firm is 500 and 500. Now, if in the long run you have 2 more firms who enter, so now we have 4 firms. Each of them is going to sell its own type of product, and we still have 1,000 consumers. Well, in this case, again, assuming that consumers will be divided evenly between each company, you see that each business now only faces an individual demand of 250 consumers. So as firms enter into the market, the individual demand of each firm is going to decrease. That's the idea. That's what I explained here. Assuming the market demand remains the same, the increase in the number of firms implies that the demand facing each monopolistically competitive firm, their individual demand, falls. The AR curve shifts to the left. And this entry process, just as was the case in perfect competition, this entry process will stop when each firm makes normal profit. So there are no more incentives for new firms to enter. Okay, also on your diagram, it's not compulsory, but I think it's a good idea to recognize that the long run demand in this case is going to be more price elastic than the short run demand, simply because there are more businesses in the market selling more varieties of product. So it means that there are more substitutes. When we move from the short run to the long run, the number of substitutes has increased. So we can expect that as a result, demand will become more price elastic. That makes sense, right? In my diagram, I do represent that. And yes, this entry process stops when each individual firm makes normal profit. Okay. And then the opposite would be a situation where each monopolistically competitive firm makes subnormal profit in the short run. So in this case, instead of having more firms entering the market, we will have existing firms leaving the industry, which means that, again, for a given size of the market, for a given number of consumers, each remaining firm will face a larger demand than before. Yeah, so firms will exit the industry. With the demand remaining the same, each firm will now face a greater individual demand. And because firms have left the market, because there will be fewer substitutes left in the market, we can expect the long-run demand curve to be less price elastic than the short-run demand curve, simply because there are fewer substitutes. And as was the case before, this exit process will stop when each individual firm makes normal profit. So how do we graph this? Yeah, and geometrically speaking, we'll see that the long-run equilibrium is such that the average revenue curve, the demand curve, is tangential to the ATC curve at the level of output for which the marginal revenue equals its marginal cost. Okay, it's a bit abstract like this. You'll see that when we look at the diagram, it does help a lot. Okay, this we know that already, so I don't need to summarize it. And basically, you can say that monopolistic competition is like a monopoly in the short run, and actually the diagram is exactly the same, and it has much in common with perfect competition in the long run, especially because each firm makes zero economic profit. Okay, good. We are ready to graph it. So quantity on the horizontal axis, cost and revenue on the vertical axis. So this is my short-run demand curve, D1 AR1 short-run demand curve. This is my marginal revenue curve, same positive intercept, same vertical intercept, and the MR curve is twice steeper. These are my cost curve, ATC curve, and marginal cost curve that cuts the ATC curve in its minimum. Each firm maximizes its profit when MC is equal to MR. This is the profit maximizing quantity of output. If we want to have the price at which the firm should sell its product, we look for the demand price at QM. So I go up until I meet the demand curve and I read the corresponding price PM. So in this case, do we have positive or negative economic profit in the short run? Well, if we need to answer this question, we just need to look at the value of the ATC at this level of output at QM, and you see that the price is greater than the average total cost, which indicates that this firm is going to make a positive economic profit. Good. So that's the short run equilibrium. What's going to happen in the long run? In the long run, firms outside the market, they see that the market is profitable, that each firm makes abnormal profit, so they will be willing to enter this market. Can they do that? Yes, because there are no barriers to entry. As they will enter the market, okay, and there is a deadweight loss, all right, I forgot to mention it, but yes, we'll talk about that later. In the long run, more firms will enter the market, and as a result, the demand will decrease. The demand will decrease, and also you see that the slope has changed. I deliberately represented slightly flatter to recognize the fact that as more firms enter, there will be more substitutes, and therefore we can expect the demand to be relatively more price elastic. Okay, so basically the demand is going to shift to the left, and this entry process will stop when there will be a point of tangency between the new demand curve, D2AR2, which is the long run demand curve, and the ATC curve. So basically you see that the demand curve is always smaller or below the ATC curve, apart at one point. The point there, the point of tangency, which means that at this particular level of output, the price is going to be exactly equal to the ATC, which means that the firm will make zero economic profit, normal profit. But for all other levels of output, you see that the ATC is above the price, will always be above the price. Therefore, we will always have negative economic profit, which means that the best profit that the firm can make, the highest profit that the firm can make in that case is zero. Make sure you graph the MR curve properly. In particular, you need to make sure that your marginal revenue curve is going to cut the MC exactly at the level of output where you have this point of tangency between ATC and AR. Why? Because you do maximize your profit when MC is equal to MR there, and this maximum profit is zero when the ATC is equal to the demand curve. Okay, so same thing, MC is equal to MR. We have the right quantity there. If I want to find the price at which I can sell my product, I look for the demand price at QM. It is going to be there. And I see that at this quantity of output, the price is equal to the ATC, which means that the firm is making normal profit. Okay. I can do exactly the same thing now. We'll talk about the deadweight loss in a minute. What about if firms make a loss in the short run? So in this case, this is the short run equilibrium. You see that the point at which MC is equal to MR, the level of output at which MC is equal to MR, is such that the price is lower than the ATC. You see that the ATC curve is always above the demand curve, which means that it is impossible to make profit. There is no level of output at which we can make a positive economic profit. So basically, each individual firm is making a loss in the short run. So what's going to happen in the long run? In the long run, some firms will leave the market, will exit the market, which means that now each market segment, or let's say each remaining firm, will face a higher individual or larger individual demand. So the demand curve is going to shift to the right, increase in demand, and you'd see that it also becomes slightly steeper simply because there are fewer substitutes in the long run, and therefore we can expect the demand curve in the long run to be less price elastic. Same thing, this exit process will stop at the point of tangency between the demand curve and the ATC curve. You see that at all levels of output apart from this one, the ATC is greater than the demand curve, which means that if we produced any level of output like that, we would have a negative economic profit. The only level of output at which we can make zero profit, which is the highest profit we can make, is this one, QM, where MC is equal to MR. So same thing, be very careful when you draw your marginal revenue curve. Make sure that it cuts the marginal cost curve exactly at the level of output at which you have the point of tangency between AR, demand curve, and your ATC curve. And you see that at QM, the point that maximizes your profit, the price is equal to the the price is equal to the average total cost, which indicates normal economic profit. Okay. So you see that in my two diagrams, I have represented the deadweight loss. So let's just say a few things about efficiency. Let's talk about allocative efficiency and let's talk about productive efficiency. We'll start with let's start with this one. Let's start with the short-run equilibrium. Okay, we have one here. And then we'll have a look at the long-run equilibrium. So in the short run, do we achieve allocative efficiency? So remember that allocative efficiency, let me write something. Allocative efficiency is when, oops, sorry. Yes. Allocative efficiency. Let me go back to the right. Okay. Yes. So allocative efficiency, I made a mistake when trying to write something, is when the marginal cost of production is equal to the marginal benefit of consumption. Remember that the marginal benefit of consumption is given by the demand curve. So your demand curve is your marginal benefit of consumption. And the marginal cost of production, well, we have it here. So which level of output would be allocatively efficient? Well, when the marginal cost is equal to the marginal benefit, which is exactly there, okay? Marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. So let me give it a name. Let's call that QAE for allocative efficiency. This would be the allocatively efficient level of output. So clearly, this is not what the monopolistically competitive firm is producing, and therefore we do not achieve allocative efficiency. The consequence is the existence of a deadweight loss. The deadweight loss is always represented by the area between the marginal cost and the marginal benefit, between the quantity produced by the market or at the equilibrium and the allocatively efficient level of output. So there's a big triangle there. It's not exactly a triangle because it's a curve, but doesn't matter. This yellow area is the deadweight loss. So we don't have allocative efficiency. How about productive efficiency? Remember, productive efficiency in a firm is achieved at the level of output that minimizes the ATC curve. So the ATC curve is minimized at the point of intersection between MC and ATC. So this, so clear, this level of output there is the level of output, let's call that QP, that is productively efficient. The level of output at which we minimize our average total cost. So do we achieve productive efficiency? No. Again, we see that we do not produce the level of output that minimizes the ATC curve. So the lesson that we have to remember is that in monopolistic competition, in the short run, we do not achieve allocative efficiency and we do not achieve productive efficiency. Okay, good. How about in the long run? Is this the same in the long run or is this different? Let's have a look at that. Let's see if this is identical or not. So in the long run, let me erase my drawing. Okay. In the long run, this is our long run equilibrium. So again, do we have allocative efficiency? Well, you can see that no, we still don't have allocative efficiency. MC is equal to MB, marginal cost is equal to marginal benefit, would be here. Okay, remember again that the marginal benefit is given by the demand curve. So that's still my demand curve, but now in the long run, D2. So we have allocative efficiency at this point. Let's give it a name again, QAE. Okay, and we see that we do not operate at this particular product level of output. Oh, what happened? QAE. Okay. So again, even in the long run, we do not achieve allocative efficiency. And the consequence is the existence of a deadweight loss. Perhaps we have productive efficiency. Are we lucky? Well, no. Again, you see that we do not achieve productive efficiency. The level of output at which we would achieve productive efficiency is again the level of output that minimizes my ATC curve. And again, it is different from what we currently produce in the long run QM. So basically what you can remember is that in monopolistic competition, we never achieve any type of efficiency. In the short run, we don't have allocative efficiency, we don't have productive efficiency, and in the long run, we don't have allocative efficiency and we don't have productive efficiency. So we never achieve an economic efficiency. which makes sense when you think about it, in particular in terms of productive efficiency. It's not possible that we achieve productive efficiency in the long run, because we know that in the long run, the equilibrium is at the point of tangency between the demand curve and the ATC curve. Yeah, and the demand curve is downward sloping. So at QM, the slope of the demand curve is the same as the slope of the ATC curve. And since the demand curve is downward sloping, we know that, it means that at the equilibrium, the ATC curve must also be downward sloping. So we will always be on the decreasing section of the ATC curve. It is impossible that we are somewhere here in monopolistic competition. Of course, because otherwise you would not have a point of tangency. You would need to have a demand curve like that, right? If you wanted to have a point of tangency. And you can't have a demand curve that is upward sloping. Since it's downward sloping, you must, the firm will operate at a point that is going to be strictly smaller than the minimum efficient scale. Remember that the minimum efficient scale is the level of output at which you minimizes your ATC curve. We say that firms have excess capacity. Excess capacity is a situation where the firm operates at a lower level of output than the minimum efficient scale. Okay, let's summarize this idea. And you see there is not much else to say. Okay, so monopolistic competition and efficiency. So under monopolistic competition, both the short-run and long-run equilibria are productively and allocatively inefficient. Not great. Yeah, this is because product differentiation allows firms to keep their demand curves downward sloping. Yeah, this gives them market power. This gives them the ability to charge a price greater than the marginal cost. Okay, this note is not very important. And what I explained there, in the long run, the equilibrium level of output will always lie on the downward sloping section of the ATC, simply because the demand is downward sloping. So monopolistically competitive firms have excess capacity. This is a key word that your students must know, which simply means that they produce a level of output below the minimum efficient scale of production. What else? Yeah, so because they produce less than the level of output at which they would have fully used all internal economies of scale, we can say that firms have not yet fully exhausted all the benefits from economies of scale. So in terms, for consumers, what do you think is best? Is it better to have perfect competition or monopolistic competition? It's a good debate you can have with your students. On the one hand, because in perfect competition, firms are price takers. They have no influence on the price, so they are not able to charge a higher price, to raise the price. So from that perspective, it's good for consumers to have perfect competition. Yeah, because firms, it's a very competitive environment, so prices will be lower than in monopolistic competition. But on the other hand, there is something that is very good about monopolistic competition, is that consumers have the choice. Consumers can choose the type of product that they like best. What do you think you would like best? Would you rather have a street with 20 restaurants that sell exactly the same food at a very low price because they are competing really hard, or a street of 20 restaurants, slightly more expensive, not much, but slightly more expensive, but having 20 different types of food, so you can choose. So you see, it's not easy to tell. So that's what I explained here. Even though consumers face a higher price in monopolistic competition than in perfect competition, yeah, because firms are price makers in monopolistic competition, consumers benefit from greater product diversity. They can select a product that better matches their preferences. Okay, the end of the PPT is just a few comments. Yeah, high levels of competition will encourage monopolistically competitive firms to cut costs, provide high quality products. So it's likely that if we compare monopolistic competition with a monopoly, it's likely that monopolistically competitive firm will not suffer from as much inefficiencies as was the case in a monopoly. And finally, a few words about advertising. Yes, each firm can invest in advertising in order to increase product differentiation, to defend their market shares, to reduce the extent to which consumers can switch from one product to the other. This is one way to keep your demand downward sloping, to reduce the price elasticity of demand, or actually the cross elasticity of demand. But of course, this has a cost. Advertising is costly. So from the point of view of businesses, there is a trade-off between the cost of advertising, TV campaign, for example, and the benefit of advertising. So the benefit of advertising could be more demand, more consumers are aware of your product, and also could be consumers that are more captive. You can increase brand loyalty, you can improve your brand image, you can reduce the extent to which consumers can switch from one brand to the other. So you can have more consumers and consumers that are more loyal or more captive. So this is a benefit. Okay. Well, a few additional comments. Let me just show you something, and then I'll stop here for today. Something that I have designed this year to illustrate the short run and the long run equilibrium in monopolistic competition. So we have school. This was an example that was more relevant for me last year, because I was working in a school that did not have any canteen. So the kids, they were just going out at lunchtime to buy something in the street, or they were going to the restaurant. So let's just say that this is my school, and just outside the school in the street, you have many different sellers. What we have, I forgot, we have a food truck number 1, kids meals, it says. We have a burger, looks like Indian food there. We have pyongmyeon. Well, you see, there are many different types of food. So this would be a good example of monopolistic competition. And let's say that in my school, there are 200 students, okay? There are 200 students. And here you see that there are 10 sellers, 10 people, or 10 person who sell food outside the school. So let's assume that students, they are distributed evenly between these sellers. So if you have 200 students and there are 10 food sellers, then each food seller is facing a demand of 20 students. And let's assume that in this case, each food seller is making abnormal profit, $100, okay? So what's going to happen in the long run? Since each seller is making abnormal profit, this is going to attract new food sellers close to the school. So in the long run, you see the difference? We have more now. There are 2 extra food sellers. So let's try to find which ones. I think these are these 2. Yeah, these 2. These 2 are new, I think, if I'm not making a mistake. Yeah. Yeah, these 2 are new. So we have the same number of students, but now we have 12 sellers. So again, let's just assume that students will be divided evenly between these 12 food sellers. Then each food seller is going to get around 17 students. And in this case, because they have a lower demand than before, remember that they had a demand of 20 students and they were able to make profit with 20 students. Now they only have 17. Well, in this case, they will make normal profit, zero economic profit. And this is when this entry process will stop. I can do the other way around. So same thing, there are 200 students, 10 food sellers. So 20 per food seller. But now let's just assume that in the short run, each of them makes negative economic profit. So let's see what's going to happen in the long run. Is it going to be more or less food sellers? It's going to be less. Some of them will leave the market. So this one has left. I don't know what this one is, but this one has left. And which one? And this one, right? No, it's still there. Oh, this one. Yeah, this one has left too. Okay, so we have 2 food sellers who have left the market. Perhaps they now sell food in another street or in front of another school. And basically, you see that now that there are only 8 food sellers, the individual demand facing each of them has increased from 20 to 25. And initially they made a loss, but now that they have 5 extra students every day, they can make a zero economic profit. And this is when this exit process will stop. Okay, so we talked about efficiency. Let's just have a last exercise and then we'll just wrap it up for today. So this is a good exercise to summarize everything you need to know about monopolistic competition. So I show this simple diagram, and here are the questions. Identify the profit maximizing level of output. At what price would the firm sell its product? What abnormal profit, if any, would be made by the firm? Is this a short-run or long-run equilibrium? Describe the subsequent adjustment that might take place in the market, which means in the long run. At what level of output would productive efficiency be achieved? Okay, so profit is maximized where, okay, I can actually do it. You see, I was, sorry, again, it seems like I was lazy, so I did not do the answer. So equilibrium, MC is equal to MR. So that is going to be the quantity that maximizes my profit. Let's call that QM. Okay. Where is the price? Well, same thing. If I need to find the price, I need to look for the demand price at QM. So I go up until I meet the demand curve. Okay. And I read the corresponding price. That is going to be PM. That's the price. Okay. Now, is there a profit? Yes or no? Well, if I want to answer this question, I just need to look for the ATC up. The average total cost at this quantity of output, it is there. Let's just call that ATCM. Okay, and then you see that the price is greater than the ATC, so this is going to mean that there will be a positive economic profit, abnormal profit. Let's just identify it. It's going to be over here. Okay, so this rectangle there, I can't really shade it on Zoom, but you see this green rectangle. This is abnormal profit. Is it short run or long run equilibrium? Of course, it's short run. How do we know that? Because in the long run, we would have zero economic profit. So it cannot be a long run equilibrium. This is a short run equilibrium. What will happen in the long run? Well, in the long run, firms will be attracted by this abnormal profit. So there will be more firms in the market, which means that the demand curve, the individual demand curve facing each firm will decrease in the long run. It's likely to become flatter, more price elastic because there will be more substitute. So we'll have a new demand curve, and this entry process will stop when the demand will reach a point of tangency between the ATC curve. So this could be something like, okay, something like that, for example. Let's give it another name. Let's call it D2 equal to AR2. This would be my long run demand curve. Long run demand curve. So you see that there is a decrease in demand. Let me put an arrow. There is a decrease in demand. Okay, we can put it like this. And if I need to draw the marginal revenue, the new marginal revenue curve, so this is where you have to be careful. You need to make sure that it is going to cut the marginal. You can start by identifying the optimal level of output, okay, the point of tangency. This is going to be the quantity that is produced in the long run, QM. And make sure that when you draw the marginal revenue curve in the long run, the new MR curve, make sure that it is going to cut the marginal cost at this level of output, okay? So this would be something like that. Up. Let's call it MR2. Okay, and you see that, of course, at this particular level of output, at QM, the price is equal to the ATC, and therefore there will be normal profit. Yes, we've seen that. There will be normal profit at this particular level of output. Yes, and finally, which level of output would be productively efficient? Well, that's a very straightforward question. When your ATC curve is minimized, when the marginal cost cuts the ATC curve, so we can call it QPE as I've done before. This is the level of output at which we achieve productive efficiency. Okay, easy, right? Let's go back. I just want to make sure I have answered all the questions. Hold on a second. Sorry. I have an issue with my computer. Hopefully it's going to come back very soon. Hopefully. Okay, is this fine? I had a problem with the computer. I hope we are back. Okay, I just wanted to go back. Oh, I know that's a problem with PowerPoint. I think yes, my PowerPoint has frozen. Okay, I think anyway. I do think I have answered all the questions. So I think that's about it about monopolistic competition. I think I said everything that I wanted about this market structure. Uh, yeah, it's definitely not working well. My apologies for that. I'm going to try to fix this. Stick with me. Okay. It should be working now. Okay, so yeah, I think I answered all the questions. Yes, 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 yes. Good. So tonight it's a one-to-one webinar. Avril, yes. Do you have questions? Or are we good? Okay. Thanks for joining. So this is the last webinar on market structures. The next one, probably tomorrow, is going to be about consumer equilibrium. So it's going to be about budget lines first, about utility, marginal utility, total utility, the equimarginal principle, indifference curves, price effect, substitution effect, income effect, different goods, and all, and all, and all. So I'll probably do that tomorrow. All right. If no question, then again, thanks for joining. Have a nice evening and see you very soon. Bye-bye.